It's August the 2nd, 2014. This is 508, a show about Worcester. I'm Mike Benedetti. This is Brendan Malikan.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for an introduction. I don't know what to do at that point unless you introduce me. How are you?
I'm okay. This is a show about Worcester. We don't have any guests on the show today. It's just another show, Brendan and I co-hosting with ourselves. Today we're in the Winslow Street Park here at Pleasant Street and Winslow Street in Worcester.
A bench securely fastened to terra firma, Mike. This is something new for us.
This is not like last week's seasickness episode. Today we're going to talk about the internet and we're going to talk about crosswalks. We're going to raise awareness of the internet. People need to know about this stuff.
And raise awareness of pedestrian activity.
We're just hanging out here in the park today, playing soccer. The main thing we're going to talk about today is municipal broadband. Maybe we'll get onto a big rant about crosswalk flags. I want to talk about a couple of things before that, though. Just hit some headlines. I don't know if you saw this, Brendan, but I just want to highlight this. It's probably the biggest news of July 2014. This is on July the 22nd. The Worcester Emergency Management Department posted this to their Facebook page. Height, pointy shape, and isolation are the dominant factors controlling where lightning will strike. The presence of metal makes no difference. Do you hear that, Brendan? The presence of metal makes no difference? I just want to repeat this one more time.
Read that again for me. I'm not sure I'm following this.
The municipality of Worcester, on their official municipal emergency management Facebook page, saying the presence of metal makes no difference.
In regards to what, though? I missed the beginning.
Lightning.
I heard something about
lightning.
Oh, okay.
But I just feel like it's an offensive thing to say in any situation, because metal. This is the metal mecca, Worcester, Massachusetts.
I
don't know.
That's what you get.
I haven't heard. I mean, I'm not saying people need to be fired over this. Obviously, people don't need to be fired. Don't get me wrong.
But people were offended.
I think people should have an off-site. They should have, what do they call that? Professional Development Day. Take the emergency management department to a show, Motorhead show at the Palladium.
This is
sensitivity training.
I was going to say sensitivity training is in order. Probably even an ethics training. There's going to be some sort of There's malfeasance at hand.
Anyway, that was a dumb thing that was on the internet this month. That was made me very happy. Another thing that's made me very happy is the return of Bizarro Lukes to Twitter.
Really?
Did you know this?
No, I killed my Twitter account.
Bizarro Lukes is back. This is a long-standing Twitter account parodying Constantina Lukes, Worcester City Councilor. Connie was not a fan of his Twitter account. I always thought it was cool. Like, I always would honestly feel if somebody posted a Twitter account parodying me that was that funny and good-natured, I would be in support of it.
Yes.
Because it would be very flattering. It was very funny. Bizarre Loose is back, posting again. I don't know what's going on. There's about a 6-9 month break.
I think she maybe
there.
felt it was considered a competition.
Connie did.
Yeah.
Because of
she had to up her game.
Her insane quips about the city.
Well, yeah. I mean, she just didn't want anyone moving into her territory. She's cornered the market in terms of humor on the council. That's always been her angle. I don't think
pretty
she
close to.
Wants anyone to muscle in on that territory.
Well, do you want to talk about sidewalks first, or do you want to talk about?
You want to talk about
broadbands first?
We'll talk about whatever makes you happy.
People are running around this parking lot.
That's okay. It's summer in the city. This is what's supposed to happen.
This is like the Seventh-day Adventist right here, and it's a Saturday night because people are going to church. It's pretty cool. Did you see this thing? Speaking of Connie Lukes, Worcester City Councilor, did you see this thing about crosswalk flags?
No. What are we doing with?
Oh, this is so good. So this is an item that she brought up on a recent council agenda, asking the city to consider doing a pilot program of a pedestrian safety program, starting it in Webster Square in Worcester, based on the successful pedestrian safety programs they do in Austin, Salt Lake City. I'm trying to remember what other cities she mentioned, but there's many other cities that are doing this. Kirkland, Washington, near Seattle has this. This is a thing. There's videos of this on the internet. People can find out. At a crosswalk, there's two tubes like attached to the light poles on each side of the crosswalk or whatever pole. Each of the tubes has these orange flags. A little stick. It has like a little stripe of like reflective material on the orange flag. It might have some text. Maybe about 3 or 4 on one side, 3 or 4 on the other side. The idea is you're going to cross the street. It's busy. The crosswalk. You grab this flag. You have this orange flag, crossing guard style. As you go across the street, you put it in the other little tube at the other side, the other little storage tube.
I don't want to knock on Councillor Lutz, but does she really think that those flags are going to last more than a week before they're in people's gardens and whatnot around the city, or attached to the roof of frat houses?
This is a good question. I mean, people have done this. I think it's maybe going on a decade now in some of these cities. So it is a thing that's happening. In Salt Lake City, I know the ones near the schools are run by the city, and a lot of the other ones are sponsored by a local business or something. I don't think there's like a logo on the flag or anything. If you sponsor one in your neighborhood, though, when the flags get stolen, I think you pay the city 50 cents a flag to replace the flags. There's a group in Seattle who...
So I actually got to put a deposit on my ability to cross the street and use the flags?
Not you, the sponsor. The sponsor.
Okay.
So, for example, in this neighborhood, maybe the Pickle Barrel theoretically would sponsor this, and every whatever, the city's, maybe the emergency management department, newly rocking emergency management department.
A serious question? Do you? I mean, you walk a lot. You walk a lot in the city. Do you really find like walking to be a challenge in the city?
Walking in the city is only a challenge at busy streets and busy intersections, because and I'll tell you this, there's no culture of stopping for the crosswalk, or there's very little. Like, sometimes you get to like a 4-lane street, like Park Avenue, busy section, you get on the crosswalk, and like one of the lanes will stop, and the other 3 lanes will still be going by at high speed, and you're just sort of like, why are you, like, I appreciate it, dude, but like, honestly, you're just clogging up a lane for nothing. I'm just gonna have to run across like a rabbit. Obviously, the other thing that goes on is, especially on streets like Main Street and Pleasant Street, is you got a bunch of people just running across the street all day and night. Some of them walking across the street very slowly in traffic all day and night. There are cities, I've certainly been to cities, I'm remembering cities particularly in Arizona that I've been to, that when you get to a crosswalk, people just stop. People just stop like, this is the thing to do. But I think it's a question of building a culture around that.
No, I agree with you completely. That's why I asked. Because I walk more in Boston than I walk in Worcester.
Yeah.
And I find that walking in Worcester is terrifying only because of my experience walking in Boston, where they've figured it out. It's just like Manhattan at this point. And it wasn't always that way. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, walking in Boston was taking your lives in your own hands. But especially downtown Boston, there's been a culture shift. And either you're at an intersection that has the little, white person or orange person telling you to either walk or not walk, which is interesting because Boston's, they run a lot faster than ours do here. They cycle through quicker, even in wider, 4-lane streets. So traffic gets moving quicker and people pile up and, they wait knowing that the opportunity is going to come. That opportunity comes more frequently and doesn't slow down traffic as often as a result of them cycling so quickly. And then on the side streets that don't have any signal for pedestrians, everyone, including cabs, just knows to stop. It's only when you run into somebody who's from out of town that you ever get somebody even coming close to making contact with a pedestrian, and you usually have an entire crowd of people getting ready to kick somebody's side mirror off their car if they dare come within 5 feet of a pedestrian in the sidewalk. Well, I mean, people scream at motorists if they don't come to a complete stop, on a right-hand turn or something onto a side street. Walking myself in Tatnick Square, I find it actually terrifying now because you have no idea what people are going to do. They look at somebody who's not in a car, whether you're on a bicycle or following laws on a bicycle or walking. They look at you like you're an alien. What are you doing not inside? How could you possibly exist outside of your car? As if there's no oxygen out here or something like that.
And if you bike in the city for any number of time, you're going to have plenty of people in cars yell at you to get your bike on the sidewalk where it belongs, which is obviously not where it belongs.
Ridiculous if you're over the age of 12, I think it is. Yeah.
And certainly legally, I think you're pretty much, a lot of Worcester, it's a bad idea to have your bike on the sidewalk, and a lot of times it's probably illegal to have your bike on the sidewalk.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I had the experience the other morning on Lincoln Street. I was walking down Lincoln Street, and I was going to cross the street, and there's like a truck. There's like nothing coming one way. There's a truck coming the other way, but I'm like, I got plenty of time. So I'm not even going to run it. I'm just going to walk across the crosswalk. So I'm walking across the crosswalk, and this truck doesn't slow down at all. And finally, the truck basically, I'm like, as it's coming closer, I'm like, what's going on? And finally, I kind of run across, but the truck driver kind of freaks out a little bit and like screeches to a halt in the middle of Lincoln Street. And like the passenger of the truck is like screaming at me about what an idiot I am. And I, of course, being a pedantic jackass, I'm trying to say like calmly, like, I hear what you're saying, but like you need to in the future stop for people to crosswalk. And he's like no. So I think that's part of it too, is that like we don't have a culture of stopping at the crosswalk. People probably in general have no idea that if there's a pedestrian trying to use a crosswalk, you have to stop for them. Honestly, I would like to see a lot more crosswalks because one source of stress for me as a pedestrian is if I'm going to do something like crossing Park Avenue at one of the four-way stops,
Yeah.
and it's busy, and there's probably, like, honestly, there are frequently are 2 or 3 pedestrians who want to cross at the same time, but it's just sort of like, why are we stop? Well, it's a four-way light. Why are we stopping like dozens of people's cars for 2 minutes or whatever in order for me to cross the street?
Yeah.
Like, if there was a there's a crosswalks nearby on Park and on Chandler. If I could go to those crosswalks where it's a lot less busy and walk across, and people would slow down, and we could all just stop our cars for 5 seconds while I run across the street, I feel like everybody wins.
That's actually one of the differences I notice in Boston too, and I think they're starting to change it more in Worcester, is that, so if you're at a four-way that is a major intersection in all directions that would require a signal for people to cross, the signal actually turns to the white person letting you cross from orange.
The man.
He's
not a white person.
He's not actually a white guy. It's not a racial statement. It's that the light is actually white. So it goes from orange to white to tell you to cross, only for the straightaway, right? So if you're making a left or a right-hand turn, the pedestrians still have the signal to cross at that point, and you just have to keep your eyes on them. But that's also the thing that the city does, where even a side street like Winslow Street here would actually have a crosswalk on Winslow, which it just seems like a no-brainer, right? Like when you resurface this road, there's going to be some sort of, painting of lines or something on the street. Put a damn crosswalk in, right? I mean, it just makes sense. And I think that's one of the places that we miss out too, is that we don't do a good job of training motorists in Worcester that every intersection that connects two sidewalks is inherently pedestrian territory, right? Like
yes.
that's
the other thing. Is that right? Is that you don't have
transport from one side to the other.
Well, and that you can. I think you believe you can also. I don't know. I got another crosswalk. I have an actual crosswalk anecdote here. It's actual crosswalk news I want to bring up.
No.
This is another thing which I posted to the internet. So there's been these crosswalk stings that have been going on for years now in Worcester. Every once in a while, a city councilor comes up and says, let's have crosswalk stings, where they have a plainclothes police person, as I understand it, standing at the crosswalk, and everybody who blows through, a concealed police car comes out and like busts you and gives you a ticket for running the crosswalk when you should have stopped. And people don't like this. Like, there was a citizen petition a couple months ago in front of the city council, signed by, I think, multiple people, complaining about the one that they were doing on Lancaster Street at Dix Street, sort of near the Art Museum.
Yeah.
And they were just like, they wrote a whole letter out. They were like, this is unfair. This is not, and you can imagine, like, I shouldn't say nobody. Plenty of people stop for people in a crosswalk, but most people don't. 90% of people, it's not even on their radar that I think it's just the sense of, like, this is a good place where you could try to cross the street, and not like I'm obligated to let you cross the street, but like, go for it, pedestrian. If you can make it across in time, go for it. That's people's sense of what is just and what the law is. So I'm sure people get pissed off if they're driving down the street and suddenly the cop is stopping them for like nothing.
And not even realizing that they did something wrong, right? Like, you don't even know
right.
what to apologize for. It's not like you were doing 90 on the highway. He just...
Right. You're like, this is how you find out that this is a law, by getting a ticket for it.
Which then calls into question how you got your license in the first place. But
well,
that's a whole other
who knows? I mean, you get that one question wrong and you can still pass your test. You don't have to get 100% of every traffic law.
Sure.
So anyway, on Tuesday, I think it was, two friends of mine were driving, and they were at Chandler and Winslow Street. And they were the recipients of a fender bender. And immediately these police came out of nowhere and like wrote up the incident report of the fender bender. And they were like, what's going on? And they look around and they realize that there was a crosswalk sting going on at Chandler and, not Winslow Street, Chandler and, I'll remember it in a second. It starts with a W. It's kind of closer into downtown street. And the amazing thing was there's a guy standing there holding a sign, a crappily, hastily made sign that says, it's a crosswalk trap, which kind of sounds like it kind of sounds like a Star Wars reference. Yeah. But I think they didn't talk to this guy. They drove to my house from there because I don't live very far from there. And immediately, as soon as I heard about this, I was like, what are you talking about? And then I walked down there, and it was already gone. Like, I think that them dealing with this little minor accident and whatever, and talking about it and blah, blah, blah. the sting and everything had evaporated by that point.
Sure.
But I'm pretty sure, I bet you that this is a person who's an aggrieved person who got in a ticket and decided to take it into their own hands.
We've talked about this before too, and I simultaneously love those stings and despise them at the same time because they only fix half of the problem, right? Like that's actually, I think, how you effectively start a culture shift, making at least people aware that this is happening. I would probably take it a step further though and say, or take a step back and say, you probably don't give somebody a full fine for that kind of violation. If the campaign is actually about awareness, then hitting people with a huge fine is probably not the right way to go. Like,
I should say I think that I was, how do I know this? I believe that I was talking to somebody who got a ticket for this, and he was like, I'm not even going to show up. They're not on the court side enforcing these at all.
Okay. Well, I mean, just the idea being that, again, talking about Boston, I don't mean to make all these comparisons, but as Boston has over the last 10 years seen a huge uptick in cycling and actually been actively promoting cycling as a form of transportation, Boston and all the adjacent communities have been doing things like stops on the side of the road where police will be pulling people over for running a red light on a bike. And they essentially make them think that they're going to get a ticket, go through all the motions, asking for ID and whatnot, and then essentially give them a free helmet for, at least, or like the ticket will be a voucher for like safety gear or something like that. It's very much like an informational thing. The idea is like, we don't want you to die or be involved with killing somebody, but we're not really interested in jamming you up with a $200 fine.
Right.
The other problem though is that, and the thing that this is what I think Worcester really misses, is that there's no education on the pedestrian side as well. Like there are laws about being a pedestrian, just like there are laws about being a driver. And I think that's part of what we miss. Like it's not uncommon in the city to see people just randomly walking out into the middle of the street, meandering about as if everything is a crosswalk.
Yes.
And I mean,
or honestly, actively being a jerk and standing in the front of traffic.
Wicked slow,
this happens all the time.
Against light, even if you're in a crosswalk, against lights that actually are signaled and whatnot for pedestrians. And I think one of the bigger problems is that in Massachusetts, last time I looked anyways, the jaywalking fine was $1. And it's like, how can you even justify law enforcement getting involved to enforce laws that have a monetary or penalty of $1, right? I mean, that's a complete waste of a police officer's time to even get out of the car. I don't know that flags on the side of the road. It seems like it's a nice idea, but it skirts around the idea that we actually have a beautiful system of laws in Massachusetts involving pedestrians, cars, bicycles, just about anything that horses. I mean, goats, I think, are probably built into road laws at this point. Anything that could find itself on a roadway, there's a law attached to it, and they're shockingly well fleshed out if you actually sit down and read them. They're not very confusing. They make a lot of sense, and they're extremely fair. But the pedestrian side doesn't really get any attention at all. And we have just as many, for every jerk that doesn't stop at a crosswalk, like you said, there are just as many people who are just meandering about the middle of the street, acting as though they own the entire road. There are joggers who, because, sidewalks hurt their ankles, so they run in the street against traffic. And that's kind of off-putting if you're a driver as well, too. And it gives pedestrians a bad name overall. You go to Boston, you go to Manhattan, and you've got these beautiful, large cities that have figured out, like, this sort of give and take.
Social contract of how are you supposed to walk.
Right. It's not hard, right? I mean, we're all trying to get someplace. We all think wherever we're trying to get is the most important thing in the world, so we're going to work on this together. And sometimes it means you have to stop, and then you get to go again. So it's not that big of a deal.
Give and take. Give and take, as it were.
It's a give and take. I can see that they install flags, intersections around the city. The flags will all get stolen. Then we're going to install cameras to protect the flags. The cameras will probably get broken, and the flags will keep getting stolen. Eventually, we're just going to have police officers handing the flags to people, and then we're going to wonder why we just don't have cops at every intersection holding your hand as you walk across the street. It's not that complicated,
That's
right?
Service. That's
we actually just
service.
Need to have an education campaign to explain to people that we've had laws in existence that cover all this stuff. They're older than all of us who are alive right now, and we just got to figure out how to work with them in a meaningful way.
How do we enforce the laws in a way that we change that sense of how things, what is fair and what is just, and how are we going to give it?
Where is Batman when we need him?
Brennan,
we need him most.
I want to, this is the kind of problem I feel like Batman couldn't deal with. Oh, that reminds me of the thing about the mimes. Man, I can't believe it's too late in the show to bring up the thing about the mimes. We've talked about this before.
How do you leave someone hanging with mimes?
Next week. This is very super relevant. Brazilian mimes. Or maybe it's Colombian. Let's talk about municipal broadband.
Sure.
Brendan, we have a
storm is coming.
A storm is coming.
Well, this is there's some interesting stuff happening that I didn't even realize this was taking place until a Telegram article the other day talking about how Comcast was There's going to be so Comcast has been in the middle of a merger with Time Warner Cable for some time now, and it's been a big national story because it's become the largest lobbying operation in the history of ever, really, to push the federal government to approve this proposed merger between Comcast and Time Warner Cable, which will eventually mean that Comcast owns about 70%, if not more, of the overall cable internet market share nationwide.
Okay.
Part of that is going to involve customer swaps. So currently, if you look at a map of cable internet providers in Massachusetts, it's essentially all Comcast with a little sliver of Time Warner over in far western Mass, and that right on the New York border. And then central and south central Massachusetts is all Charter. Charter is essentially
that's us.
That's us.
And if you're watching this show, it's very likely either through Charter Cable or Charter Cable Internet.
Yeah. And so the idea is that if this merger does go through, and it's still in front of the FCC and various other federal entities to approve that, which they seem likely to, there's actually going to be some customer swaps that take place where Charter is not necessarily going to get absorbed by Comcast, but they're just going to get the heck out of Dodge, so Comcast can just own the entire region. And for all the customers they give up in, say, central and south central Massachusetts, they'll get equal number of customers in the southwest, I believe it is. And it'll kind of just put them in a territory where they're a little bit stronger, and then Comcast will have a unified region up here. The problem is that Comcast is a terrible entity. And I'm not just saying that because I've got a bone to pick with Comcast. It's year after year they're actually voted the worst company in America by Americans from a consumer perspective. They're not really highly regarded. They tend to be one of the bigger threats to things like net neutrality and just general principles of awesomeness on the internet.
And this is probably in large part because these cable companies tend to have monopolies.
Well, they're regional monopolies. The word monopoly probably doesn't really fit because we almost invite them in through weird sort of contractual agreements and then regulatory processes that put them into an area, but at the same time don't leave enough customers that would be worth dicing up, right? So Worcester has around 40,000 cable internet potential customers, households. How are you going to dice that up in a way that's actually going to make it meaningful to come in and compete? So that they'll say that they don't have a monopoly, they just don't have any competition. It's
Don't they in Worcester though? Don't they literally have a monopoly that the city does a contract with them and gives them the?
We have a contract, but because we deregulated a lot of these services years ago, it's only a contract in the sense that the city could kind of be put in a position of power to mandate certain things that we don't actually go so far as to mandate, price controls and what have you, and not really much comes of it. So it's not a monopoly in the truest sense of the word, and it's probably on the municipal side not really a meaningful contract in the true sense of the word. The only reason I'm talking about this is that it could be a really good opportunity for Worcester to start thinking about something along the lines of a municipal, at least internet service to compete. Something that is happening in other cities. Chattanooga, Tennessee, probably the best example of a municipal fiber project, a gigabit fiber project that's similar to what Google Fiber is starting to roll out in a lot of cities. But it's something that we could actually do ourselves and then not have terrible service. And that's the key, right? At the end of the day, it's not so much just about is Charter better or worse than Comcast, or is Comcast a better deal than Charter is. It's that at the end of the day, the United States of America every year is sliding further and further behind. Remember, we're the ones who invented the internet. Like people like Vint Cerf and whatnot really need to be really sad at this point that we are behind countries like Estonia in terms of internet access speeds. You get those mailers from Charter and other companies promising high-speed internet. We don't actually have high-speed internet in the United States. Where we are now would be like having a 14 baud modem relative to the rest of the world. We're actually lagging further and further behind year after year, and a lot of that is because the cable companies that are our primary service providers, they don't really have enough competition that would push them to increase service through infrastructure upgrades.
No, let me say, Brendan, I feel like on this show, for whatever reason, our libertarian tendencies frequently come out. And this is basically a libertarian podcast. But I think that this is an area where there's a strong argument to be made for creating a municipal broadband system, because it is basically a monopoly, or it's a duopoly where you could get bad internet from the phone company or kind of less bad internet from a terrible cable company like Charter or Comcast. People would say, government is going to give you worse service, worse whatever than these guys. Yeah. Compared to Charter and Comcast, no, these people are terrible.
They really are.
They're not very good.
No, and that's it. And I think that one of the biggest problems, and even though that the internet has not really been treated like a common carrier or a public utility in the legal sense. I think most people view it that way at this point. Maybe not so much cable, but definitely internet access. I mean, it's like, if there's a storm and you have a power outage that also includes internet access, I'm going to guess that Charter gets just as many phone calls in Worcester as NSTAR or National Grid or any of the power providers and whatnot. Mm-hmm. People do view it as a public utility, and I think that it's in the public interest for the government itself to actually look at those services being provided, and if the private sector isn't doing the job that they promised to do or has the consumer's best interests at heart, where possible, it kind of is their job to step in and take over those services themselves, which is why years ago we got into a big fight in this country over the municipal delivery of power services. You had privates that weren't actually living up to their obligations, so the federal government made it possible for municipalities to step in and provide those services themselves. And we do have a lot of communities that do, contract out their own power services, just like internet and cable companies, and a lot of them seem to be very happy with it.
So, what is it? I mean, if everybody on the Worcester City Council tomorrow said, you know what, municipal broadband sounds like a really good idea, let's pursue it, what is the first thing that's keeping them from pursuing it?
There really wouldn't be anything that would be keeping them from pursuing it.
There's no legal restrictions, there's no...
Not currently, no. I mean, that's interesting, though, because there are a lot of fights happening on both the state and federal level, mostly pushed by companies like Comcast to make that sort of project illegal. For the simple reason that when a municipality does this, like Chattanooga, Tennessee, Comcast, they lose money, and they don't like losing money because they're a corporation, but they're losing money to a competitor that's providing a better service at a better cost. That tends to be exactly how capitalism functions.
So if this Worcester City Council came out this week and was like, let's really pursue this, the first thing that would happen actually is that the state legislature would immediately pass a law making it illegal, and then our first battle would be to get around that law.
That actually wouldn't be shocking to see a lot of lobbyists move into play very, very quickly in the state to start stopping that, to stop that from happening. We haven't seen it in the past when it comes to municipal cable services, but those speeds are really only competing with Charter and Comcast on their own playing field. They're not, in most cases, they're not offering true high-speed internet access in the form of gigabit fiber or whatnot.
So Chattanooga is an interesting example because they're about the same size as
they're
us.
About 170,000. So
okay.
I mean, give or take.
And so what are the how did it go for them?
It was a long process, starting with a feasibility study, and they actually took a very interesting approach where they didn't bring in a bunch of outside consultants and contractors to do the work for them and then just hand them the keys to the car and say, now you run it. They really did everything on their own. With the intent that they were going to use that as an economic engine to build up an IT sector that previously wasn't very strong, knowing full well that having gigabit fiber was the sort of thing that was going to draw young entrepreneurs and companies into the city just to have access to that kind of bandwidth.
Right. So in this case, you might have this thing where it would be like, well, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about living in central Massachusetts or whatever, and I'm thinking about trying to do some kind of company, and why should I live in Shrewsbury versus Worcester? And the answer might very well be because Worcester has completely sweet internet access.
Which, if you're the kind of person who just uses the internet to check your email or whatnot, that might sound completely Looney Tunes, but I assure you it's something that's actually very meaningful to a lot of people. It's
very meaningful. It's very meaningful to me.
Yeah, well, I know, but it's not to discount the fact that there are a lot of people, especially in Worcester, I'm sure, who don't make full use of the internet. It's probably because our services really aren't that strong. If you, again, bring up Boston, I feel like I'm pitching them more than anything today. Boston has been, Mayor Walsh in Boston has been having some conversations about municipal fiber for just that reason. There are so many of the sort of co-working spaces and entrepreneurial sort of, throw a word at me here, sort of group.
Sure, whatever.
We'll call them co-working spaces.
Business
but there's a lot of incubators that are there in the IT sector. This is one of the things that they're all screaming for, right? I mean, even if you have a corporate, Comcast line coming in for broadband, you still got to find a million ways to split that up to all the people who are functioning there. If you bring in a gigabit fiber line, suddenly you don't really have to worry about bandwidth, and you're not reaching out to larger companies like Level 3 or whatnot to provide direct access that's going to cost you a fortune. You can do this on a municipal level or with third-party vendors, right? I mean, it was years ago, a few of us in the city were pushing really hard to try and lure Google into the city when they were starting their municipal fiber project. We weren't super successful with that, obviously, but it was a good walkthrough in the idea of getting people interested in Worcester, and people actually seemed interested, including the council, who put together, a little video and whatnot, and I believe it was a poem under Mayor Joe O'Brien's term that they all recited together as part of the pitch to lure Google in here.
Well, Brendan, we've got about 45 seconds left on this week's
Well, I'll
show.
just say goodbye then. Let's actually think about looking at a feasibility study to bring some high-speed internet to Worcester. It'd be pretty awesome, and I think it'd make us really competitive in the region.
So it's the city council's move would be to ask for this feasibility study?
I think that's a place to start, especially if we're going to work within the constraints of any form of government. Yeah, I think that's what we need to do.
Make it happen. People, this is the 508 show. I'm Michael Benedetti, Brendan Melican. We're out of time for this week. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.